Hey everyone, and welcome back to another installment of the Travel and Tourism Podcast, my first season. My guest today worked for Club Med from 1991 to 2002, and his first season was at Club Med Copper Mountain as a ski instructor. He worked aboard the Club Med 1 in 1994 and worked in Club Med resorts such as Cancun, Pontresina, Punta Cana, Roi Soleil, Sonora Bay, Sandpiper, and fun fact, he replaced me as Chief of Sports in 2001 in my favorite place, Lindeman Island in Australia, though we sadly did not meet. He met his future wife at Club Med Sonora Bay in 1998, and he has DJed all over the world in such countries as Spain, Mexico City, Berlin, Vancouver, Miami, and all this happened in his life after Club Med. Seasoners, please help me welcome the one and only Mr. Eric Turner. Hey, Eric, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. You kind of sound like a DJ here with this amazing sound of yours. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Happy to welcome you into my home studio for the night.
Well, thank you. You know, people say, hey, Greg, good stuff on the podcast. You have a great face for radio. And I say, thank you. All right. Well, I've heard your name my whole career in Club Med. Sadly, we never got to meet. And I actually didn't know you were the chief of sport replacing me. I had already left, then you arrived. Your name came up on Hammer's episode there when we did the third season anniversary. So it's good to finally talk to you.
Yeah, same. It was, it's interesting that we were both with the club for so long and never really crossed paths. I think that happened with a lot of people.
Yeah, it did. And we are here to get into your story, your backstory, kind of your origin story. And I believe that you were working at a restaurant and a waiter showed you a photo album that showed his time when he was working at Club Med. Is that right?
Yeah, I was actually, I was working at a restaurant in Frisco, Colorado, which is about 15 minutes from Club Med Copper Mountain. And one of the waiters there had been a GO for a few seasons. And we were hanging out at his house after work one night and talking about stuff. And he started showing me this photo album. And it was pictures of being at the beach and snow skiing and being on stage and things like that. And I had studied theater in college and had been a ski racer and a sailor all my life. So I was like, wow, this sounds like something for me. And he said, well, a buddy of mine is in charge of hiring the ski instructors for Copper Mountain. We should call him. And this was at about, I don't know, it was probably 2:00 in the morning or so in Colorado. And we called Freddie Ricard in New York City. So it was like 4 something in the morning for him. And my friend Dave said, hey, Freddie, I've got this guy who he wants to be a ski instructor. He's done this and this. And Freddie said, okay, well, the ski stage starts in Copper in 4 days. Just have him be there and I'll try to get some paperwork there in time.
Freddie didn't say, and why the heck are you calling me at 4 a.m.? No?
He probably was thinking that, or else he was still half asleep and didn't remember that he had done that. It was interesting because they had worked together in the past, and it was one of those things, kind of like, I don't know, a lot of things in Club Med, if you know a guy who knows a guy, and they had been friends, and he was like, hey, this guy would be good at it. And he said, okay, I trust your judgment. Let's get him out there.
And where is Freddie from?
He's from Sweden, actually, but he grew up in the States. One of the most amazing linguists I ever met in Club Med. He spoke, I don't want to say 6 or 7 languages, totally fluently, no accent at all, which was unreal to me.
Okay, I'm embarrassed to ask this next question. I'm going to anyway. When he was at the bar, did he drink Ricard?
It was funny. We used to tease him about that all the time. He didn't, but we said he didn't have to because he already had the name. So he didn't have to.
Perfect. That's even better that he didn't, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That was definitely the source of a lot of entertainment, I think, was those Ricards at the bar with the French team.
Yeah, well, it's good that you had that kind of in, because obviously this is 1991. It's before the internet. It wasn't like you really had to know someone. That's how I got in too. Like it seemed to me that you had to know someone who had already been in Club Med, right, to get help, to get that jump, correct?
Yeah, and I think there was unless you had been as a guest or if you knew somebody, it was really hard to actually even not only know about Club Med, but really even know what it was. And so for somebody to try to explain it to you, unless they came to your town for a recruiting thing or something like that, it was really impossible to actually know what you were getting yourself into unless you, fortunately, like I did, had somebody to show you a photo album full of memories and say, like, this is what it's actually all about. So yeah, it was great.
And 91, Copper Mountain, you're with another, well, I guess the first French Canadian chief of village, or Canadian chief of village, actually, Pierre Letelier Gagnon. So what do you remember about arriving? Do you remember anything about that first day or first week?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting because arriving as a ski instructor, especially a first season ski instructor in Copper Mountain, you actually arrive when you're new. You arrive a couple weeks before the village opens, and so you get there before anybody else. And it's just all these kind of new hire trainees, stagiaires that would go in and do this kind of training tryout process. So you get to know each other and kind of bond together as a team of ski instructors first. And then you start to meet the rest of the team as they arrive, and there were people who were there in the village already that were the permanent ones, like Yuke, who's the chief of maintenance, was there. He lived there year round, and so we would always go back and see him. With Pierre, I didn't actually meet him until about a week into my being at Club Med, so it was a little bit different than a lot of people who, when you arrived, the first thing you get is this overwhelming experience of everything that's already happening, and you kind of go into this tornado of shows and crazy signs and costumes and all kinds of craziness. When you start off as a ski instructor, it's a lot different. You go in and you really start as a ski instructor, and then all of that stuff happens. But it was a lot of fun, and I mean, amazing experience. And I actually ended up doing, I think, 8 seasons in Copper Mountain. I would do winters there and then summers in the beach resorts for a lot of years.
Well, yeah, exactly. And when you got there, was there any culture shock, Club Med culture shock about anything? I guess, did Freddie tell you you'd have to do crazy signs that many times a day? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of went in knowing that there was going to be the stage stuff because my friend who had shown me the pictures said, you're going to be on stage every night. There's rehearsals in the evenings. It's all about kind of having fun and whatever. So I was excited for all that anyway. I had been on stage a lot and had studied theater in college. So that was something I was actually really looking forward to. But there was still a lot of culture shock as far as the culture shock actually started before the village even opened because we stepped right into a French ski school. So it was all these new words and stuff. I didn't speak a word of French at the time. And there's so obviously, a ton of new vocabulary. Then you're surrounded by French speaking people and you're trying to kind of pick up on conversations and figure out what's going on. So yeah, there was definitely a whole bunch of that at the beginning. But then once we got the rest of the team in and the guests started arriving and it became like, really super international, it was pretty amazing. It was overwhelming in a great way because Copper Mountain was basically in my hometown. I went to high school about 15 minutes away from where the resort is there. And so I was in my home area, but I felt like I was in a whole other world. And so it was very cool to have kind of both of those things at the same time.
Okay. I just have a quick question, Eric. Since you started at Copper and I see your second season was Sandpiper, so being a ski instructor, was there a big difference between going from mountain to, well, I guess ocean? I'd say ocean, but Sandpiper
to river.
To river,
mountain to river. Yeah, it's I didn't realize at the time because obviously I'd gone to work for Club Med because I wanted to travel. I got injured at the end of my first season, so I ended up having to go into my second season a little late after having knee surgery, and so I ended up going to Sandpiper. And it was funny because my whole thing was I wanted to travel around the world, and my first 3 seasons were Copper, Sandpiper, Copper, which for an American was probably the least exciting way to do it, but it ended up being amazing because I got to see some really great stuff. But after all those years in Copper, it was what I really realized was there was like 2 different Club Meds, at least at that time. The mountain ones and the beach ones were very kind of, they had the core Club Med and the core, excitement and entertainment and fun and all of that stuff. But what was always really exciting in the mountain villages was that every single guest who was there in the village on any given week was all there for the exact same reason. Everyone was there to ski or snowboard. And so when you go to a regular summer village, even if it was like a scuba intensive village or a tennis intensive village, there were still, hundreds of people who were there not for whatever that one main activity was. So it really kind of created this cool vibe in the mountain villages that it was, it was this kind of camaraderie with the GOs and the guests and the GMs because everybody was really there for a passion for skiing and a passion for snow and mountains. And then I went to the summer villages, which after growing up in Colorado was unbelievable for me to be able to go and spend all this time on the beach. And, even though it was a river beach in my first season and get to spend, my day sailing and still getting to do the great entertainment stuff in the evening and all of that stuff. But yeah, it was definitely a difference, mountain village versus summer village or beach village.
And your second season, which is Sandpiper, coincided with Greg Snyder's first season as chief of village, correct?
Yeah, it became kind of a theme. I remember when I was listening back a while ago to the third anniversary issue with Hammer. I worked with him his first season chief of village. Worked with Greg his first season chief of village, and there's actually a few others. So it was pretty fun. But yeah, with Greg it was really cool. And again, I didn't realize at the time until I had done a number of other seasons. But Greg had been one of those GOs that had been to a lot of the adult villages, and so coming into Sandpiper hadn't really had the kind of like adult village energy and kind of vibe. It had this reputation for being kind of a sleepy place. And our season was absolutely a ton of fun. We had such a great season, and it was really fun to kind of have that totally different experience than what I had had at Copper with, being in the beach resorts, but also being in a place like Sandpiper that was going through a big change with somebody like Greg there. It wasn't your typical kind of golf crowd. It was there was a lot of fun that we had there.
Yeah, I can imagine because, like you said, he did all these adult villages. So even though Sandpiper was a family village, Greg Snyder first season, it's probably not gonna feel that way, right? That season, okay, which is a good thing, right? Because
Yeah, and I think something that was really great about that too was that, as GOs in Sandpiper, I mean, because it was all families, and particularly back then, it was a lot of really, really young families, a lot of babies and toddlers. So the families would go to sleep early in the evening, and then after that, we would go to the nightclub, and it would be all GOs. And there'd be a few GMs that would come and hang out, but for the most part, it was kind of like a an adult village Geo party every single night because the guests had all kind of gone off to bed and put their kids to sleep and things like that. So it just made for a really fun atmosphere. It was a lot of fun.
yeah, and after this season of Sandpiper, you go back to Copper with one of my favorite chiefs, Jean-Pierre Grand, and
Mm-hmm.
then you go to Cancun with Greg Snyder. So I'll let you decide which one you want to talk about. But I'm just curious what Cancun was like with Greg Snyder in an adult village and nothing holding him back.
Yeah, it was really funny because what a unique kind of perspective to have my first two summer seasons being with the same chief of village, but one in probably the most family village of the time and the other in probably the most singles village of the time. So yeah, it was a blast. I mean, going from Sandpiper where, we would have a weekly golf demonstration and we would have, we had rollerblading and we had things like that, going to Cancun where it's like, water ski shows with the crocodiles in the water with everybody, and being able to go from sailing. I was a sailing geo in Sandpiper, sailing, on the river, to going to, that beautiful sailing beach in Cancun and spending time in the ocean. And yeah, it was amazing. But yeah, with Greg, he brought the same energy, but like you said, there was nothing to kind of hold back. So when we were in Sandpiper, it was very much kind of like, buttoned up, making sure that the families were having a great time, and but still bringing all that energy. And then in Cancun, it was a lot more about let's kind of lead the party, let's have the fun, and get everybody else to come join along with us.
Okay. And then after that, you go back to Copper with Oreo Stern, and then Club Med 1 with Jeff Plantablat. So I'm just curious, did you request Club Med 1 after Copper, or they just needed you there?
Yeah, I mean, what I had requested, and for everybody who remembers back in those days, if you would put in your kind of three top requests, I really basically only said I wanted to go outside of the zone if possible. And I didn't really care where it was. I just wanted, I'd really come to Club Med to travel. And I'd spent my first like three of my first four seasons in the US and one in Mexico. So I was like, I'd love to get out of the zone somewhere. And the opportunity came up to go to the Club Med one in Europe, which was amazing. It was my first time in Europe, and we got to basically see the whole Mediterranean and a whole bunch of different countries and have some just amazing experiences because the ship was just, it was another world. I mean, it was still Club Med, but it was a totally different version of Club Med than I had experienced in any of my other seasons.
Run down some of the countries you visited for me, please, Eric.
So when I first arrived, I flew into Spain and we did our training in the Club Med in Marbella, and then we picked up the Club Med one in Malaga when it crossed after it did the transatlantic from the Caribbean, and then we went to southern France. We were based in Cannes for the whole summer. That was kind of our home base, and then we would go depending on the time of the summer. We had some different cruise itineraries that we would do, and we would go to Monaco, Corsica, all up and down the coast of Italy, Sardinia. We went to Malta, to Greece. We actually went back to Spain. We went to Ibiza, which was my first time in Ibiza, which I've been back a number of times since then. But that was quite a story as well, because the one time we went to Ibiza with the Club Med One was when we had the ship completely booked out by the Atlantis Group from here in the US. Anybody listening to this is probably familiar with the Atlantis Group. And what was amazing about it was the ship was 98% French GMs all summer long. And then when the Atlantis Group came, it was like 98% Americans. And so it was just a totally different vibe. And then, we went to Cannes and Saint-Tropez and Ibiza and Barcelona and a whole bunch of places because they got to pick the itinerary, and those were the areas that they wanted to visit.
Sounds like a blast.
It was a ton of fun. Yeah, it was interesting. In Ibiza, we were in the main old port of Ibiza. We had the ship on the dock there, and all of the people that were all the GMs from that week, from the Atlantis week, all wanted to go visit the big, huge nightclubs in Ibiza, particularly Pasha. And so the excursion team organized buses, and they came, and these gigantic buses came and picked everybody up at the ship. And we all went over for the night over to Pasha, one of the most famous nightclubs in the world, which was an absolute blast with that group.
I just have a quick question about the Club Med One itself, because you were doing water ski there, right?
Yep.
So since there's such high standards on the Club Med One, did you have to wear polo shirt or t-shirt when you're driving the boat?
We did, actually, now that I think about it. I hadn't actually thought about that in a while. But yeah, we actually had uniforms every day. It wasn't like in a lot of the villages, we would just have dress themes. And particularly when you were in your activity, you would just wear whatever. But on the Club Med One, we had uniforms, and we had, a day uniform, a night uniform. We had an elegant night uniform. We had specific ones. They were all Hugo Boss, of course, because it was French, and it was the Club Med One, so we had to be in Hugo Boss. And so yeah, we had our uniforms that we would wear while we were doing our activities.
Is it true you didn't have to do your own laundry there?
That was one of the benefits of having a uniform. Was, yeah, you got to drop off your laundry at the laundry spot, and then they would do your stuff and get it back to you all folded and pressed and ready to go.
Sounds like a dream.
It was amazing. Way better than trying to find the time to do your laundry in a regular village, for sure.
That's right. Well, after that fun in the sun, you go back to Copper, 94, 95. You do a summer off in 1995. Go back again to Copper, 95, 96 with Jean-Pierre Grand. And here's a curious one, because I don't get many American GOs that worked with this chief of village. So in 96, you go to Pontresina with La Guitoune, correct?
Yeah.
But now you're doing cycling and biking. Okay, so tell me about this season.
Yeah, so that ended up being a great season. Back in those days, there was a lot of, we mentioned it was, you kind of had to know somebody. Well, back in those days, if you knew somebody, they could help you get to a particular village. And I had been the assistant chief of ski in Copper with Momo. He was our chief of ski. And he was going to Pontresina as chief of sports for the summer villages. He did chief of sports in the mountain villages in the summer. And so he was able to invite me along, which was amazing. It was absolutely the best shape I've ever been in my whole life. I was a cycling GO, and we had an advanced and a beginner road biking each day, and an advanced and a beginner mountain biking each day. And because the other, we had an au pair cycling GO that was there with me. He was the only other one, so he couldn't take the advanced group. So I would do probably right around 50 kilometers on road bikes in the morning. And then in the afternoons, probably another 20, 25 kilometers on mountain bikes in Switzerland, obviously, which is not flat. So it was amazing, but what a cool summer. It was a short season. but it was an amazing, amazing village. Just a beautiful spot. And growing up in the mountains in Colorado, I felt right at home, and it was a ton of fun. But yet doing the season with La Guitoune was it was cool because as you mentioned before, I had worked with a lot of new chiefs of village, and particularly, North American chiefs of village. So to work with somebody who was one of the kind of classic French entertainment based chief of villages, he's a fantastic saxophonist and hilarious on stage and really great. It was a cool way to see, not only be a part of the kind of Club Med culture by being in a mountain village in the summer, but to be a part of it with that type of chief of village, like somebody who really brought the history and, everything that Club Med was kind of built on and had come up since it was really young. So it was great to have that kind of an example and to see someone like that firsthand.
La Guitoune played the saxophone, you said?
Yeah, if I don't remember, he was the sax player. Yes, he
Okay.
did. Yeah.
And I have a question because, we've seen GMs arrive with, like say brand new equipment for certain sports. I'm guessing that when these guests came, they would bring their own bike and it was probably state of the art everything. Did you ever notice that?
Yeah, we definitely had that on in the advanced rides. It was, all these like French, German, Italian cyclists who were super, super into it. A lot of people came by car to that village. And so they would bring their own bike. They would have all their full kit and everything like that. So obviously you had to be able to kind of stay out ahead of them when you were out riding, which was that extra push. Although we did do for the beginner rides, we did have our own fleet of cycles. And that was a big part of the job that I had there, was keeping those all maintained. So it's kind of like, when you're chief of sailing, you repair all the boats, and when you're in charge of cycling, you do the same with the bikes. But yeah, they were definitely into it, so much so that I remember during the Tour de France that summer, they would have us schedule our advanced road biking tour around when the Tour de France was going to be on TV, at least the finish, so that everybody could see what was going on that day because everybody was so super into it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that since you were leading these sorties. Did you have to wear a yellow jersey?
I actually did have a yellow jersey, but it wasn't
Okay.
because of that. Actually, my
Okay.
my favorite cycling jersey I ever got, I bought when I was in Switzerland. It was a red one that had the Swiss flag, and it had these Edelweiss flowers on it and stuff. It was pretty amazing.
Your legs and calves must have been jacked after this season, I'm
It
guessing.
it was nuts. I mean, going from ski village in the winter, skiing, 100 plus days, straight into that all summer, straight back to the mountain villages of, skiing again 100 plus days was, yeah, it was definitely the best shape I've ever been in my whole life.
Well, yeah, and then you go right into copper after this
Mhm.
season, but the legs are fine, even though you haven't
Right.
been skiing, they're fine. Then I see you reunite with Pierre Letellier Gagnon in 97 in Punta Cana. And here
Yes.
you're chief of sailing, chief of sport. So tell me about a little bit about this season.
Yeah, I mean, as happened, I think to a lot of people in Club Med during that season, I had been chief of sailing, and the chief of sports left for, I can't remember exactly why, he had to go home for a family thing. So I was kind of unofficially promoted during the season, which was amazing. And then I ended up going on and doing my stage after that. But it was really great. This was pre-renovation. So this wasn't, once it became the kind of mega Club Med that it did in the end. So it was still very kind of small and tight, and everybody could, you cross paths with everybody during the day. And again, that sailing beach there is one of the most amazing beaches I've ever been on in my whole life. So it was a great spot.
Okay. I am curious about the your chief of sports stage because not often I can talk about it. We both did ours in the same place in OPO. You were there a year before me. So I'm wondering, was it what you expected? Were you in a classroom like 7, 8 hours like I was a day? Like how was yours?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I knew what to expect. I think that it was one of those things where, if you wanted to be chief of sports, you thought about wanting to be it, but you never really thought about what it was going to be. And then I remember showing up, and one of the first things that really struck me was, first of all, how international it was, and kind of getting to know everybody. I think there was probably I don't know, 10 or 12 people in my stage. And it was really cool to get to know a lot of these people that I had never met before, that I had heard of, or, cross paths with in a totally different thing. There was a couple of guys in my stage who I had been ski instructors with that were European ski instructors, but then they were kind of going, as I was, kind of more along the summertime promo track. And so, yeah, it was fun, but there was a lot of, it was a lot more classroom than I thought it was going to be. I remember one of my favorite parts about it was, and I actually still use this in my work today as an example. I talk to people about this. We did this exercise where they gave us this task to do by team, and they broke the teams up by nationality. So it was kind of like, the North Americans, the North Africans, the Italians, the French, the whatever, everybody kind of broke up in their thing. And no one was allowed to watch the others do the task. And it was, you had these milk crates and these boards, and you had to get across the parking lot with your whole team without touching the ground. And they filmed us while we were doing it. So they could film the way we did it, but no one else was able to watch. And they also timed us. And then when we went back into the classroom, we all watched each other's video of how each nationality approached the same task and did it in a different way. And so, like, when it was the time for the North Americans and the stopwatch started, we kind of all sat down and strategized. And we said, okay, we're going to do this and this. No, that won't work. Okay, we're going to do this and this and this. And then we did it once and did it correct. But we took a long time to plan at the beginning. And then I remember when the French guys went, it was, okay, let's just start going. And then it won't work. And then we'll start over. And then we'll do it again a different way. And it won't work. And then we'll do it a different way. So when we were watching them, we were laughing at them. When they were watching us, they were laughing at us. And then we realized that we all arrived at the end result the same. And we all took just about exactly the same amount of time, but we all did it in a totally different way. And for me, that really summed up Club Med. And it was really important to learn that in my stage when you go into working with people from all different nationalities and all different cultures. And you start to realize that, just because somebody does something differently doesn't mean it's wrong. They're probably, they might be way smarter than you at something, and they're doing something in a totally different way that doesn't make any sense to you, but it might be the way they grew up or how they learned it in school or cultural or whatever. So it was really interesting. And I keep that with me today from that stage all those years ago.
And who organized your stage? Like, who was the main person in charge?
It was Alan Dequam.
Okay. Okay. So I had the same person. Now you said you were 10 to 12. We were 20 exactly. So I don't know if you had a small one or I had a large one. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I think back then it was kind of like they knew ahead of time what they needed. And so it was just a matter of like, hey, this is how many we need. Let's put this many through.
And did Alain make you guys go jogging like in the morning before?
Every day.
Okay. So what my favorite memory is, so there were 20 of us. There was one Geo who actually didn't have to travel. He was from Opio. And the first morning we had to run. All 19 of us were there waiting for him. This guy overslept. So all 19 of us in Alain Dequoy went to his window. Someone told us where he slept, and he had a ground floor window. And to his horror, he looked at, when we knocked on his window, he saw all 19 of us in Alain Dequoy outside. The guy from Opio overslept. I'm sorry. I just had to say this story.
That was always one of the funniest things in Club Med was, I mean, because you live and work in the same place, when people wouldn't show up for work, or if they were late, or if they overslept or whatever, it wasn't like it is kind of out in the real world where they're going to call you or call your house or, send a text or whatever. So in those days, like, you knew where the person lived and you could just go sort it out. I actually remember a funny story from Copper Mountain, a guy named Remy, who's our ski school director from Switzerland, who we had a number of years out there, very Swiss, very much about being on time. And if you weren't on time, he would send somebody to your room to knock on your door and get you, down to the ski school locker room. And as soon as you would show up in the locker room, he would start to take your equipment and throw it out the door to where the guests were all waiting for the ski lessons. And so if you didn't get dressed and get ready to go fast enough, you had to go outside in front of the whole village and basically pick up all your stuff and put all your stuff on in front of everybody to embarrass you into never being late again.
And you probably weren't, right?
Exactly. Yes. Nobody was. Although he did have a way to deal with that if you were. I remember there was one ski instructor who was chronically late. And the prank that they played on him was they actually took his ski boots, they buckled them up so they were completely tight, filled them with water, and left them outside overnight so they froze completely solid, so that he would come in last second while he was scrambling to go out for his class and not be able to put his gear on.
So he had a pair of bootsicles, is what you're telling me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I should mention, I forgot, like you were at Roi Soleil with Rico Paoletti as chief of village when you left for your stage, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And he had also actually been my chief of sports on the Club Med One.
Okay. Was he one of the ones that was kind of like pushing you? Because we all need someone to propose your name. So do you know which person proposed your name for the stage?
Yeah, he was. He definitely had some to do with that for sure. He was after the season that I did on the ship. He knew that I was interested in sticking with the club for a while, and I think that he definitely had a little bit of say in that for sure.
Okay. So as we learned from Hammer's second appearance on this show, he requested first season GOs and a lot of women GOs, because let's face it, they're better and have less problems than we do. So
Exactly.
You were one of the first season GOs. You were the first season chief of sport. And so, well, let me just ask you. So tell me about your experience at Sonora Bay with Hammer's first season as chief of village.
Yeah, I mean, he's been so important in my whole life. Again, he's another one of those people that I talk about all the time in my daily work. Use him as an example a lot. But one of the things that he did that was really genius that season, and I think it kind of went unnoticed, and thinking back on it, I started realizing what he actually did. He kind of built a team in layers where he kind of set everyone up for success without making it, too obvious. So he had a lot of first season chiefs of service, myself included. I think we were, out of all the chiefs of service, I think maybe there was only like 2 or 3 that had done other seasons as chief of service before. But all of the chiefs of activity, so my chief of, sailing, scuba, water ski, all that, were all really, really super experienced. So as a first season chief of sports, I had this amazing team of super experienced chiefs of activity, many of whom I'm sure you worked with in the past. Winnie was chief of scuba, had, let's see who else. Mark was chief of water ski. We had, can't even remember all the names right now. Francois was chief of sailing, Francois Gay. And so it was like we had this great experienced team, and then they had a whole bunch of first season GOs underneath them. So it was all these layers. So you had layers of experience to be amazing examples and to be kind of the people that these first season chiefs of service could count on. And then you had all these great new first seasons, whether they were first season in their job or first season to Club Med, bringing all that new excitement and energy. And it was, absolutely amazing. I mean, I did 20 plus seasons in Club Med, and it was by far the best season ever, just because of that whole vibe and atmosphere that was created there. And we had so much fun while doing a really amazing season. The guests had a blast. We had, we did some of the best numbers that village had ever seen from satisfaction and things like that. And at the same time, we were all having a blast as well. So yeah, it was an absolutely amazing season for a lot of reasons, actually.
One of those reasons, you met your future wife who was working at the boutique, correct?
I did. I actually teased having her come on today while we were doing that. She's like, no, you do your thing.
Well, she's more than she's invited, for her own episode if she wishes. No pressure, just so she knows.
Well, she would have a different perspective because that season in Sonora Bay was her first season. So,
well, yeah, this is what I'd like to know. Like, did you know when you met her that you were going to be married, or not right away? Like,
it was really interesting. So the story about how we met was, back in those days, and particularly in Sonora, we had a lot of people that would come by charter still, just because it was so remote there that you almost had to come by charter. And so people would come by the hundreds in buses. And then usually the pilots that flew the charter would stay in the club for that night, and then they would go back the next day with the departing guests on the charter. And so we were there doing a big arrival, and as you do, kind of all the GOs lined up and crazy signs, and there's music playing, and we're cheering as everybody gets off the buses. And behind the bus where we were, I saw this little van pull up, and it was the pilots from the flight, and there was one other person with them. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go, make sure that everything's cool with them. And I went, and it was actually Erica, my future wife, who was on there. And because she was a GO and they didn't have enough seats on the bus, they were like, okay, well, you can just like go in the van. And so I ended up going, introducing myself and helping her get checked in and helping her to her room, and had a feeling. So I, said, hey, you want to have dinner tonight? And so we met in the restaurant that night and sat at a table, and it was her first experience at a big table full of GMs, which was a ton of fun. And so kind of got to know each other, but in front of a whole group of people. And I remember about 2 or 3 days later, my best friend to this day was my chief of tennis there, Matt Skinner. And I remember talking to him like 2 days later, and I said, I'm going to marry her. And we got engaged 3 months later, I think, after about 3 months into the season. And we got married the following season in Copper Mountain on stage, which was pretty amazing. And we just a month and a half ago, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary. 25 years and 3 grown-up kids later.
Whoa, double congrats. Yeah, you say you got married on stage, so I see you go hammer to copper next season. So does he ask you to go? Like, is there okay.
Yeah, he asked us to go back. And again, it was one of those things that you don't really think about until you see it afterwards. He was doing it on purpose. He wanted to have people, you want to have those people that you know and that you've built a relationship with, but you also want to have people with experience. And, he was able to have somebody who had done, 6 seasons or whatever at that time in Copper Mountain, but we had also worked together for a whole season. So it was really cool. And so he was able to, help make the arrangements to make sure that my wife could come to Copper as well, which she's from Mexico. So that involved, a little bit more wrangling than it would have if she would have been an American GO. And so we got to Copper, and Hammer and Julie threw us our wedding. And I don't know if you remember, I don't know if you ever did this in villages, but back then, every once in a while, they would do a wedding show. Some of the villages would put on a show that was like a fake wedding.
Yes.
And it was made the whole evening. Well, that ended up being our wedding. Like, we did the actual wedding was the show. So we got married on stage. In the theater was all the GMs and all of the GOs and all the GEs of the village. One of the musicians of the village played the music for it. We were actually married by a longtime Copper Mountain GM who used to come back year after year after year, and he was an ordained minister. So he said, hey, I'd love to marry you guys. So we ended up getting married on stage in a Club Med by a GM, 2 GOs getting married. So it was about as Club Med a wedding as you could possibly have in your life.
Wow.
Yep. And then as we left, probably the highlight of the wedding was as we left the theater to go outside, all 50 of the ski instructors were lined up in 2 rows outside of the theater, and we had to walk down between them, and they had their kind of ski poles up, making an arch for us to go through to kind of leave the theater after we got married.
That's nice. Wow. Yeah. Man, you don't forget that, right?
Definitely. Yes. And then, of course, because it was Hammer, the party was absolutely amazing. We had an amazing dinner. We went back in for the actual show of the evening, and it was a kind of a cabaret show like what we used to do, but it was all new numbers that all of our friends had kind of put together for us. And they kind of put us off to the side in a little chair. So they kind of came out and did the show for us, which was amazing. And then we had a party in the lobby, and then, of course, a party in the nightclub afterwards.
And when you're getting married on stage, I hope no practical joker says, if anyone show just cause, why this? No one piped up. I hope, right?
They did not, thankfully.
Okay, good.
Thankfully.
Okay.
Yep.
And coup d'anime, as they say. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So after this season, you go to Sandpiper, 99-2000 is the year we are in now. Xavier Korn, Lino Benzoni, and here you're kind of what they call back then high potential for chef de village. Is that right?
Yeah, it was kind of the start of that. That was the kind of season, that was the first season where that really started. Was I know that Xavier, I know Hammer had pushed a bit. I know Xavier pushed, I know Lionel pushed a bit as well. And that kind of got me into that program. So that was the first time that I had done it. So this was back in those days, do you remember the Creaction thing that they did
Yes.
for a few years? This was the start of that. And I was one of the first people that kind of went through that program. And it was a lot of kind of potentially identified chiefs of village that went through and learned this whole kind of this combination of animation and activity and events and making everything really kind of event based. And so it was really fun. We also had that season, we did the launch of the not only the Trident, but the new marketing campaign. I don't know if you remember from back in those days, the Renew marketing campaign that they did, but they launched that in Sandpiper. So we had, travel writers from all over the world. They brought in, the sponsored athletes at the time that were sponsored by Club Med. So we had, at that time, there was a lot of extreme athletes that were sponsored by Club Med. So we had like Tony Hawk and a bunch of other people that came into the village for the week. And we put on, half pipe demonstrations for skateboarding and inline skating and cycling, and did circus programs and all kinds of stuff for that. But that was all during that season in Sandpiper.
And I assume you were doing some Y2K prep for this. So what's it like being, okay, you were in the United States, you had Y2K. What was there any prep done for this?
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, I think that I remember back kind of vaguely, we did a bunch of things. There was all this talk at that time that as soon as midnight hit or whatever, that, power grids were going to go out and the whole world was going to shut down. So everybody was really freaking out. And so I remember we had things like, we had given all these plans to the guests about this is what's going to happen if this happens. And we put flashlights in people's rooms, and we had, a bunch of things like that. And then what in, true Club Med fashion, we just threw a big party that night, and we kind of counted down, and then at midnight everybody kind of held their breath and nothing happened. So it's like, okay, let's just keep going then, and kept the party rolling.
And now is your son born here in Sandpiper?
He was born at the end of my second season there. Yeah, so he's a Floridian, although he doesn't like to admit that. But yes,
well,
he might
have been a Bahamian, right? Depending on.
Yeah, we went to Paradise Island when he was less than a year old.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we always joke with him that by the time he was 3, he had lived in the U.S., Mexico, the Bahamas, Australia, and the Dominican Republic by the time he was 3 years old.
And he can't remember a thing of it, right? Poor guy.
None of it. We have pictures of him as a toddler snorkeling on the Barrier Reef in Australia, and he has no memory of it at all.
Oh, no.
So, yeah.
Oh no, poor guy. Well, you have to go back now.
Yeah.
So you're with Kevin Batt that season, the 2001 season in Paradise Island with Kevin Batt. And then we get to the point where in my intro about you, I say that you replaced me in Lindeman Island. So I had left, didn't get to meet you, unfortunately, because it's always better when you can meet, the incoming and outgoing meets.
Right.
Do you still remember your jet lag from that flight? Ooh, I bet.
Yeah. And not only was it a combination of jet lag, but we were traveling with a 1.5-year-old. Oh, and so that made that flight even that much more entertaining.
I was the 1.5-year-old when I was doing that trip with my girlfriend. Like, I was the baby. So I can't imagine traveling with an actual, oh my God. Do you remember how they flew you? Do you remember your trajectory?
Yeah, we were actually in Mexico City at my wife's family's house between seasons. So we flew Mexico City to LA, and then LA to Sydney, and then Sydney to Lindeman. But that LA to Sydney leg, which it was like 14 hours or something like that, I think I didn't know this even existed, because why would I have at that point in my life? But when you travel with a little kid, they give you the bulkhead seat, and there's a bassinet that folds down from the wall that's in front of you.
Okay.
And so we were actually able to put him to sleep, and he slept for like 9 hours of the 14 hours of the flight. So it was awesome. It was really great that they did that.
Well, okay, yeah, you had a pretty good route there. I did Montreal, New York, Paris, Sri Lanka, Sydney. And I remember when they said, "Okay, Greg, we have one more plane to take." Because I flew with the chief of village, and everything. He goes, "We're taking a plane from Hamilton Island to Lindeman," and then I lost it. I said, "No, I'll take the ferry." But Greg, it's only 10 minutes. No, I'll take the ferry. I put up my hands. I was ready to go. Like, I did not want to go on another plane. So
especially that little plane.
Yes. I didn't mind that. It was just the fact of getting on another. Like I was fine, and the ferry was fun, right? I mean, you took the ferry, right?
Right.
They even let me drive it too. You know that whole
Nice.
thing was you drove the boat with buttons. It was like sitting in Captain Kirk's chair. It was so awesome. Okay.
Nice.
Did you go golfing when you were in Lindemann?
I did a little bit. Never been a huge golfer, but obviously doing seasons in Sandpiper and Lindeman, I picked up a bit of it. So yeah, I did golf a bit there.
What a view, huh? I mean, come
Amazing.
on. I mean,
Amazing.
such a small island, and we got to. Did you order food by plane like we did? Like we would wait on the runway with our money. So the last flight coming in, with Sunday all over would have pizza or McDonald's. Did you ever guys ever do that?
So we didn't do that, but what we did by plane, which I'm sure you didn't do, was we used to actually have to fly over to buy diapers for our son.
Oh, to Mackay?
So yeah, so I was taking that plane every couple of weeks just to go over to, there was this tiny little weird Target in Mackay. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, I do. I
And
do.
we used to go to, it was like in like a little strip mall, and it was like the size of like a convenience store, but it was a Target. And so we used to have to go there to buy diapers and stuff like that to bring them back. But yeah, we
Uh,
took a number of those little flights for
well,
sure.
well, when I went to Mackay, it was for to watch a movie, and I couldn't believe like they started at like 10 a.m. I don't know if they were doing it just for us because they knew we didn't have much time in the day. But yeah, I do remember going to Mackay mostly for the movies.
We went to that Mackay movie theater once or twice as well.
Yeah, wasn't it great?
Yeah, it was awesome.
And you
It
had
was awesome.
bush chooks running all around the circus and everything,
And the bats.
oh god, right by archery, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
they just terrified me. I never went down that walkway, even though because they're all hanging upside down looking at you. Like I said, why would anyone want to go through that walkway? I don't get it. Okay.
They used to take all the mini club geos would take all the kids down there to see the bats during the
uh
day.
they
And the
terrified
kids
me.
thought it was the coolest thing ever.
One actually came down. It was about dusk, and one came down to where the bar and restaurant was, and he was like just flitting down, and then he was climbing a tree, and he slowly lowered himself to the ground. I'm like, what is he doing? Yeah, I don't know. I was just freaked out by the by the bats. They were huge, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were huge but harmless. I mean, of all the things that
Yes,
can kill you in Australia, the bats are not one of them, as scary
yes,
as they look, right?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right. So from here we go to Vitel for stage, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so we had gone through the way they did, and I don't know, this might have been the only time they did it this way because everything got kind of mixed up after this. But the way they were doing the kind of chief of village promotion at that time was you would go for a month here and a month there to go, kind of live with a certain department. So you might go to a village for a month and be with the housekeeping department, and then you'd go to a village for another month and you'd be with the maintenance department or whatever. And so we had already done all of those things going from village to village. And then we had the creation training. We went to Tunisia for that, which was amazing. And then they had this thing set up where they had us do a final project that was basically they gave us a scenario, and we had to our scenario was we had to come up with basically an entire plan for hosting an international film festival for extreme sports films on this imaginary island. And so we had to basically do a presentation about how we would do that, how we would run the events and the entertainment and the everything. So it's kind of a hypothetical way of how you would create a Club Med and run it yourself if you were going to do it. And so we had to go to Vitel to do our presentations, and we presented all of our projects that we had been working on for months in our villages. And then after that, we had written tests and exams. We had to do a psychological profile and all kinds of stuff while we were in Vitel.
Oh, really? You had a psych profile?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. It
Okay.
was again, it was kind of like the chief of sports thing. Like you don't know what to expect. I think that they never did the same thing twice. So it was like you really didn't know what the program was going to be like, and then you just showed up and said, okay, whatever. And they probably did that on purpose because a big part of our jobs in Club Med was, how do you react when things happen, when you're on your heels and you haven't had the time to plan stuff. So it was probably all intentional.
And how long were you at Vitel again?
We were there 2.5 weeks, I think. Well, actually, we ended up staying longer than planned, which is a whole other story, which, probably the best time to tell that too. While we were doing one of our written exams, we were if you've been to Vitel, there's these little conference rooms that are right off the bar. We were in one of those little rooms doing a written test, and there was one other American, Paul Langus, who was in the stage with me. And we were sitting there doing our test, and somebody came barging into the room. It was at like, I don't know, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. They came barging into the room and they said, "Hey, you guys have to see what's going on in the US. Come check out what's on TV." And so they pulled us out of this room into the bar, and it happened to be September 11th, 2001 was when we were actually in Vitel taking our exam. So we went out to the bar in the middle of this whole kind of stressful testing process. And then all of a sudden we're watching, all of this stuff unfold at home that was crazy. And, the whole world changed. And we were supposed to be leaving, I think 2 days later, to head back to our villages. And because of that, because all the flights were grounded worldwide for like a week, I think I left Vitel by train, went back to Paris, and then went basically to the airport. And what everybody was doing at that time was getting on waiting lists for when the flights opened back up. So I ended up sleeping on the floor in the Paris airport for 5 days while I waited for a flight back to Australia.
Whoa, wait a minute. Are you serious? 5 days?
Yeah.
Are you?
Because there was no hotels. All the hotels were booked. Everything was taken. There was nowhere to stay. There was nothing to do. So we just stayed there, like sleeping on the floor in our luggage. And you would listen as they would call people's names as they slowly started to open flights up. And I'll never forget, the Qantas Airlines called my name, and I was like, "Yes, this is so great." And I go to the front, and they said, "Your flight is leaving in 15 minutes. You have the last seat on the plane. You have to run. Here's where your gate is, wherever." And so I took off, ran to my gate, get there just at the last second, and I'm like, "Oh man, I'm about to take this like 14-hour flight to Singapore." The last seat on the flight. Like, this is going to be a nightmare already, but it's still going to be better than the floor. And I ended up getting on this plane. It was this big 747. And I got on the plane and I didn't know where my seat was. And the flight attendant says, "Oh, you're right upstairs." And the last seat on the plane was business class on a 747 after having slept on the floor for 5 days. So I sit down in this big, super cushy, comfy chair, ready to go. And the flight attendant comes up and says, "Would you like a pre-liftoff cocktail?" And I had like tears in my eyes. I was like, I have never wanted a cocktail more in my entire life than I want a cocktail right now. So,
okay, wait, I'm going to back you up here just a sec, Eric, because I think when you travel a lot, we've all had that nightmare scenario where we're 9, 10, 12 hours at an airport, but you did 5 days. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes.
What is the level of boredom like in 5 days at a terminal? You have to, please just give me something. What did you do all day?
Well, it was stress and boredom at the same time, because we were waiting to see if we could get on a flight. We're all watching the news on TV to see what's going on back home. They're still showing re-showing the scenes of the Twin Towers falling, and they're still trying to figure out what's going on. There was all this stuff on the news about, the US is going to, invade Afghanistan because of all this stuff. This was all happening like in the days right after. And then I remember actually when I got on the flight, when you fly from Paris to Singapore, you actually fly over Afghanistan. And I was watching on the little map and I was just like, we're going to get shot down. Something's going to happen. We were freaking out the whole trip. It was boring. We were eating out of vending machines. They ran out of food in the airport. It was a nightmare.
Did you take a shower anywhere?
No, there was nowhere to.
And then you're going to go in first class on Qantas smelling like, oh no.
Yep. Yep. And then I got to Singapore. The story doesn't end there. I got to Singapore, and because that was the only leg of the flight that they had me on, I had to kind of enter the country, go through customs immigration, then get on a list for my next flight, which they said, "Oh, we can get you on this next plane. It's just leaving in a couple hours." And I was like, "Okay, that's great." It ended up being at the same gate. It was the exact same plane that I had come in on. It was continuing on to Sydney. But this time I had the last seat in economy, the one that doesn't recline.
No.
And I'm thinking of my super comfy seat upstairs on the other end of the plane that I had been on for hours.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yep. And so then I had my flight from Sydney to Hamilton was supposed to be on Ansett Airlines. You probably flew on them
Yep.
too, I'm guessing.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, cool. While I was in Singapore, I contacted the Club Med office. They said, yep, it's okay. They're, we're able to change your flight from the one you were supposed to have 5 days ago. So you can get your Ansett flight home. And I was like, okay, great. So then I arrive in Sydney and I go to the Ansett lounge, or not the lounge, the like ticketing area. And it's packed full of people. And I walk up to the counter and I'm waiting, and there's nobody behind the counter, and I'm waiting, waiting, waiting. And one of the people sitting down came up to me and they said, "Hey, you didn't hear the news?" I was like, "What happened?" And they said, like 4 hours ago, Ansett declared bankruptcy and everybody walked away from the desk
Oh, that's right.
because of September 11th, because they couldn't handle they didn't have the funds to be able to stay viable without
Yeah.
any flights. So they went out of business. So I had no way to get back to Lindemann. And fortunately, Qantas was honoring people's Ansett tickets if you were on the homeward leg of your flight. So then I had to go and spend about 2 hours and get somebody to fax something from the Club Med offices that I was an American going home to Lindemann Island, and not going to Lindemann Island on vacation, trying to scam them out of a flight to get me to an island vacation. And so finally they believed it. And I ended up getting home after, I don't know how many hundreds of hours from the time I left my last hotel room.
And did you pull an Aussie accent out of your pocket for that one?
No, I tried to pull every bit of sympathy. I was like, my
Okay.
wife's there and my son, and he's only 2 years old, and they're worried about me. So pulled everything that I could, and it ended up working, and they got me home.
My God, this is one of the best travel stories I've ever heard. Wow, this is amazing.
It's
Talk
funny
about
because
the
I
highs and
love,
lows, right? The highs
yeah, I
and
mean,
lows.
I
And
love
from
traveling, and I still travel a ton to this day. And no matter what goes wrong traveling to this day, I think back to that, and I'm like, well, at least it's not that. My flight got canceled. Whatever. At least it's not canceled for 5
well,
days. It's
exactly.
all good.
I feel guilty about complaining how I had to sleep on a floor for like 8 hours only when you did 5 days. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
And you had mentioned the kind of ups and downs. Right before we left Vitel, we found out we had started off as a group of 70 some in that high potential program, and we were 16 that ended up passing. And they said, okay, you 16, you've passed. You're going to be chiefs of village now. We're going to have you go to Paris this winter, do your final stage, do the whole thing, and then go to your villages. And then after the September 11th thing happened, they all sent us back to our villages and never did the stage. We didn't have any of that stuff happen. And none of the people that were in my stage ever ended up doing the Paris stage. They all ended up just going on to either leave the club or stay on as chief of village, but without ever doing the Paris portion of their stage.
Whoa. Good
Yeah.
Lord. Okay. Man. All
Yeah.
right. I don't know where we go from here, but let's go to your last season. So Punta Cana, 2002,
Mm-hmm.
your co-CDV with Yusuf Dowry, right?
With Yusuf Dare, yeah, which was it was awesome, and this was the post renovation Punta Cana. So this was the like 2,000 GMs a week Punta Cana, like the big monster village. And after September 11th, a lot of the villages closed down, and a lot were either empty or whatever. This was one of the villages that was completely full for the whole summer, and it was really half European, half North American. And so they sent me in so that Yusuf and I could work together. He kind of handled the Europeans, I handled the North Americans, and kind of worked together for the season. And we had an amazing time, and he's still a good friend of mine. And I remember one of the things was we marked the 1 year anniversary of September 11th in Punta Cana. And what an interesting way to do it, in a Club Med. So you still want to keep people up and celebrating and having a great time, but you also want to mark this kind of serious big thing. And I was an American in a village with somebody who was Muslim from North Africa. At that time, there was a ton of tension, and it was amazing, like the way we worked together and created this super cool, really, respectful way to kind of honor everything, but at the same time, keep it uplifting and hopeful and positive for the future and all that stuff. So yeah, it was amazing.
Okay, Eric, that is some fascinating story. Now I would like to just talk a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we'll go back to Club Med. So you're a producer and live techno performer. Can you tell me about SURCO, SURCO?
Yeah, so it's something, I have a day job, which I love, which is doing restaurant consulting and hospitality consulting. But that affords me the ability to have the time to produce and perform electronic music, which I've done forever. I was in bands growing up in high school. We had a Geo band in Club Med for all these years, in Copper Mountain. And but getting more into the electronic side of it for like the last probably 15 or so years. And yeah, I produce music. I've DJ'd for years all over the world. And most recently, I've been doing kind of live hardware performances. So I'm performing live improvised shows in clubs and festivals and things like that, playing like kind of underground techno and house music, but performing it live with synthesizers and drum machines and things like that.
And around the end of June, you'll be in Ibiza?
Yeah, I'll be headed back to Ibiza. I've been going there every year for the last, I don't know, almost 10 years now, whether it's DJing or playing live or just on family vacations. So yeah, we'll be headed back to Ibiza in the end of June. And then I've got a few shows around the States in North America. And then I'll also be going in October to Amsterdam to perform for the Amsterdam Dance Event, the ADE, which is a huge kind of electronic music gathering in Amsterdam where there's 450,000 people who go to Amsterdam for the week. And there's about 800 events in bars and nightclubs and venues and stuff like that all over the city over the course of a week. And it's pretty amazing. So excited to get back there to play again as well.
A former guest on the show, Pipo, who worked at the Club in Ibiza, told me it was a family village in Ibiza. Weird, no?
Yeah, it was a family hut village.
Yes.
was the weird thing. Was that people like Filippo Filoni?
Yes, you know him?
Yeah, so we were talking about different stories that we had. So when I was a ski instructor at Soleil with Rico Paletti years ago, Pipo was a bartender. And if I'm not wrong, it was either his first or second season. He was brand new bartender and was a super good friend of mine. And we've stayed friends to this day. And we used to, with all the Italian bartenders, and this kind of is funny because it ties right into the music stuff that I'm doing today. We would go to the nightclub, obviously, and the bartenders would be working there. We'd go to the nightclub until it would close at night at Soleil. And then with all of them and a few of us instructors who were into that kind of music, we would head into town in St. Moritz. And we used to go to the underground techno club in St. Moritz. And we went to some kind of all night raves that were held under these tennis bubbles in St. Moritz as well. But that was all with people.
And I find this interesting. Of all the many jobs you had in Club Med, ironically, you were never a DJ. You were sailing, you were water ski, you were a ski instructor, mountain biking. So kind of
so
odd,
never officially. Never officially.
Yes.
But my season in Pontresina, I actually got, when I was on one of my cycling trips, I got run off the road by a dump truck and ended up having to have knee surgery while I was there. So for the last month of the season there, I couldn't do cycling and ended up being the DJ and running the Annex restaurant so that I could finish out my season there.
Okay, kind of left that little interesting nugget out of it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the hard thing with 22 seasons in Club Med.
Okay,
I think that we could be here for 6 weeks talking about other stories.
All right, well, what's it like getting operated on in a Swiss hospital? Is it pretty good? If you have to go to a hospital in a foreign country, is it good?
It was weird. It was interesting, but yeah, no, I mean, it was actually the second time I had knee surgery, and it was just as good as the first time or just as bad as the first time. It was kind of both the same. What was interesting though, was that, in the hospital, it was obviously not a resort. So there wasn't anybody who spoke English at the hospital. So it was all Swiss German, and I didn't speak any Swiss German. So it made it kind of interesting. It was all a lot of sign language about what was going to be happening to me when I had my surgery.
Wow. That must've been kind of scary. No?
It was a little bit, but I had, as you do, you had some of your Club Med family there, and some of the people came from the resort. I remember one of the excursion geos who spoke multiple languages came and kind of helped get me checked in and all of that stuff. So it was nice.
Okay. I think I have a story here I'm supposed to ask you about. I'm going to give you some keywords because I wrote this down quickly and you just tell me the story. Corfu, Greece, visit Ipsos, Greg Snyder, Club Med 1. So tell me, what did I write down here?
So as we talked about before, I did a number of seasons with Greg, and great friend. And when I was on the Club Med One in Europe, Greg was chief of village at Ipsos Corfu. And when we were in Corfu on the Club Med One, we were anchored there. We were going to be there overnight, and we'd kind of done our work for the day, and I was getting ready for the evening, to sit down to this multi-course meal as you do on the ship and whatever. And Rico Paletti, my chief of sports, comes and he said, "Hey, you're not coming to dinner tonight. I got you out of the show tonight. I need you to go down to the water ski dock, the hall nautique that folds down on the back of the ship. I need you to head down there and be there in like 30 minutes. And you can kind of dress in your like casual street clothes that you would use to go ashore." And I was like, okay, I had no idea what was going on. And I didn't know at the time that Greg was chief of village in Corfu. So I arrived down on the dock and I see these three water ski boats, these three Mastercraft heading towards the back of the Club Med One across the bay. And it was Greg and a bunch of his GOs coming to check out the Club Med One, coming to say hi to some people that they knew and to pick me up to go back to Ipsos to hang out for the evening. So talk about a culture shock going from the Club Med One to Ipsos Corfu, this crazy singles hut village. And yeah, that was fun. But I remember very vividly, Greg came and he wanted to say hi to a few people on the ship. So he goes walking upstairs and he was walking down the hallway, which are carpeted on the inside of the ship. And he's barefoot, as he probably was the entire season in Ipsos. And he was walking down the hall and I remember him like digging his toes into the carpet. And he was saying, "This is the first time I felt carpet in like 8 months," because he had been just on the beach and sand and in a sand floored hut for that whole time.
My God, you went from the Club Med One and then you spent a crazy night in a singles village and then had to go back. Did you make your like port of call or whatever they call it like the next day?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yep. We made
bleary eyed, but you made it,
we
right?
made it back. But yeah, a little bleary eyed. And, it was funny. Like we were talking about the different vibes that you get in places. You go to a place like Ipsos from the ship, and you would see, just something as simple as the crazy signs. You would see them done in a village like that. At that time, this was like 93-ish, 94. I can't remember exactly. So in that time, I mean, things were still wild and crazy. And then you come back to the Club Med One and you still had your crazy signs, but it was like 70-year-old French GMs, and you wanted to make sure they weren't too crazy, the crazy signs. And then you go to Corfu and it was just like off the wall and people climbing trees. And yeah, it was definitely a culture shock.
That's a pretty cool thing that Greg did for you, right?
Yeah, it was awesome.
What a surprise. I mean, that's not something you're ever going to forget, I imagine.
Yeah, I think that was, I remember listening to some of the other episodes of your show and talk about the things that people did with other villages, or when you see somebody that you worked with in the past. And that was one of the things that was always amazing, was the camaraderie that you build up. And then you would run into those people. The last time I had seen Greg was seasons before, in another part of the world. And then all of a sudden we connect with this person that we've, lived and worked with for, months or years, and you see them in a totally different place in a totally other part of the world. So, and even when we were just talking about people, I saw him when he was a bartender in San Moritz. And then a few years later, we were actually both in the same chief of sports stage together in Opio. And that was the first time I had seen him since we worked together in San Moritz. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, since you worked for Club Med, all those years, do you find yourself dreaming about Club Med? Like, I asked this certain guest just because I'm curious, because it keeps happening to me. Do you ever dream that you're still back there working?
Yeah, I mean, less and less as I get older now, because I'm quite a few years out from Club Med. But a couple winters ago, my sons and I we took a ski trip and we went to San Moritz, and showing them around. And we actually went to Soleil for the evening and had dinner and saw the show and stuff like that. For like 2 or 3 weeks after that, I had dreams about Club Med for sure, because it was getting back into it and seeing it and being in the exact same place that I had been, 25 years ago. Was really exciting. It was really interesting.
Yeah, you were there in 97, 98 that season. So yeah, it must have been really surreal, right?
It was really interesting though, because, there are certain things like the theater hasn't changed. The bar hasn't changed, like still looks exactly the same as it did back then. So I walked in the door and it was like stepping back in time. It was really, really weird to step into there after all of those years.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, I think every Geo has that fantasy about going back to the one, one of the ones they worked at. So that's cool. You got that chance. That's amazing.
Yeah, I would have loved to go back to Sonora Bay, but unfortunately, I've heard it is no
Yeah,
longer even a
that's right.
building anymore. It's just a beautiful empty beachside.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, Eric, we're coming near the end of our time. I got maybe two more questions for you. Is that okay?
Yeah,
You might have mentioned it already. I just want to make sure in terms of dream seasons or that magical season for you, was it the 98 Sonora Bay season?
yeah, it really was. I mean, everything about that season itself was amazing, and it couldn't have possibly changed my life anymore. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am, where I am, with who I am, with the family and kids and beautiful wife and everything that I have now if it wasn't for that place. So yeah, that was a magical spot. And even had it not been for all of those things, that season was absolutely amazing.
It gets me thinking about fate, when you say something like that, because if Hammer wasn't first season Chief of Village and didn't specifically ask for first season, GOs like you, I'm wondering if this meet would have ever happened. You know what I mean? Like with your wife.
Yeah, yeah, and like my wife, when she was going to work for Club Med, she was actually just going to go for a month au pair, and she wanted to go to the beach. She was from Mexico City, wanted to get away and go to the beach, and so they had told her that she was going to go to Cancun. And at the last minute, they needed somebody in Sonora because somebody had to go home for an emergency. And so at the last minute, it got switched. And had that not changed, we would have never met each other either, or maybe we would have
Yeah.
somewhere else down the line. But
Yeah, look at all the turns that and everything had to line up for this to
yep,
happen. It's pretty crazy. I never used to think about this stuff then, but I do now.
yeah, it's easier looking back than it is when you're young
Yes.
looking ahead.
Yeah. And yeah, speak of looking back at your career, you don't I guess you're glad you were working in the restaurant that day. This guy shows you a photo book, and like you don't seem, to me to have to be someone with any regrets. So I'm assuming you're glad you did it, right?
Yeah, I mean, we all had our ups and downs, and it was never as easy as it looked to the GMs. But at the same time, all of those things that you do and those people you meet and those experiences you have, they change you, inform you, and shape your path, and they help you end up where you are. And I couldn't be happier with where I am today, and I wouldn't be if it wasn't for the time in Club Med.
Well, Eric, it's been so nice talking to you. I mean, it's sad we never got a chance to work together, but it was
Yeah, for
nice,
sure.
nice talking to you here for over an hour and sharing your story with us. So I really want to thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no problem. And there's an outside chance I might come to Montreal for a show sometime. So if I do, we'll have to connect for a
Yes,
cocktail.
yes, exactly. Of course, that we're both a bit older. We're not going to go nuts. It's not going to be Corfu Ipsos, okay? But it'll be maybe a Pontresina. Sure, I could get up to Pontresina level.
Nice.
Well, everyone, that was the one and only Mr. Eric Turner. Please, and refer this episode to everyone else. All you early 90 GOs are going to love it. So, again, thanks so much again, Eric, for taking the time to speak to me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much for having me.
And I'll let you take it away, Eric, in that sultry baritone voice of you, if you can say goodbye to all our listeners and shout out everyone. And if I am curious, like who you did like working with. So we could always shout out some people you did like working with, if that's okay with you. Is that cool?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I mentioned a ton of them already, from
Yep.
Hammer to Rico Paletti to, my chiefs of ski like Momo and Remy. And, over the years, there's so many people, 22 seasons with, 100-ish GOs per season is so many people, but, really, really everyone, it was amazing and an amazing experience and an amazing time. And yeah, would do it all again.
All right. Now take us away, DJ style, end this episode.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in today, and I hope to see you back here at the next episode. I know I'll be listening in. Thanks very much. See you soon.
Perfect. See y'all next week, guys. Bye.